はい、皆さんこんにちは。お久しぶりです。今日はですね、皆さんに、先日日本のニュースで、YouTube なんですけれども、それにね、日本が今すごい円安ですよね。それで海外へ出稼ぎに行く日本人がいるという YouTube 見たんですが、その中で、その人たちはどこに行ってた？アメリカではないですね。アメリカで出稼ぎはできないので、多分カナダ、オーストラリアなのかな。で、ものすごくね、海外では儲けるぞみたいな、それをしてたので、現在、ドルで稼いでる人たちの生活がどうなってるのか、皆さんに紹介していきたいと思います。
The average American says they need to earn $233,000 a year to be financially comfortable. But in 2021, American workers on average made only $75,203 annually.
Americans are sort of looking at how much money they would like to have to be financially secure, and that ends up being basically 3 times what the average income is in this country. And to be essentially wealthy or really successful, it's magnitudes above that.
72% of Americans said they weren't financially secure given their current finances. And more than a quarter of Americans said they'll likely never be financially secure.
By the numbers, their debt is lower and their savings are higher coming out of the pandemic, but they're more anxious about what's going to happen next, if they have job stability, if they're going to be able to have secure retirement.
With well over half of Americans living paycheck to paycheck, many are failing to meet some of their modest financial goals.
There are actually millions of people struggling.
で、この 61% の方たちのその内訳をね、見ていきたいと思います。で、まずですね、年収が700万未満の方が4分の3、そして700万から1400万の年収がある方の 65% がギリギリの生活をしているということです。でね、私が少し驚いたのは、1400万以上収入のある方の 45%、約半分ですよね。その方たちもギリギリの生活をしているということなんですよ。
So how did it become so difficult to be financially secure in America? And what can you do about it? Let's do some budgeting. Americans working full-time earned a median monthly income of about $4,400 during the second quarter of 2023.The average worker takes home 75.2% of gross wages after taxes and benefits, shrinking the take-home pay to about $3,388. And that just isn't enough to cover the cost of living in America today.
The cost of healthcare, that has skyrocketed. The cost of attending college has skyrocketed. The cost of purchasing a home has skyrocketed. But nowhere has anyone said wage growth is up 15%, right?Take
a look at some of the most essential expenses for Americans. The median monthly rent in the U.S. is $2,029 as of June 2023. That amount already accounts for over 46% of the Americans' median pre-tax income. But most U.S. agencies classify spending more than 30% of one's gross monthly income on rent as being rent-burdened. Meanwhile, the median mortgage payment for a 2,400 square foot house was $1,957 per month.However, a common rule of thumb advises spending 28% or less of your pre-tax income on mortgage payments. For the median gross monthly earnings, that translates to just $1,232.
As we talk to households and talk to consumers out in the real world, especially those, say, under 40, housing is the big issue. Rent, mortgage. It is the biggest concern that people aren't going to be able to make the next payment.
これね、少し付け足したいんですが、本当に賃貸の方は大変だと思います。特にラスベガス、ネバダ州の方は上限のね、キャップがないので、いくら上げてもいいそうなんですよ。なので、ずっと住んでるアパートとかの家賃がひどいところとか$500とかね、上がったりとかしてるそうです。他のね、安いところに移ろうとしても、なかなか安いところは見つからないし、あと、場所的にね、良くないところになるので、特にね、お子さんいらっしゃる家庭は大変だと思います。
Inflation is really hurting individuals having stability in their housing. And I think sometimes we underestimate that if you have uncertainty in your housing, it causes uncertainty everywhere.
Housing is also the reason why cities have become more difficult to afford. Americans said it would require more than $1 million in net worth to be financially comfortable in places like San Francisco, New York, and Southern California.
This is why we've seen some migration or mobility around the country where some people say, I'm living in a high-cost state like California or New York. We really want to sort of pack up and go to an area that's less expensive. And one of the ironies of that is those places that were cheaper before are now becoming more expensive.
これはね、カリフォルニアの大移動になってまして、カリフォルニア州からテキサス、アリゾナ、アイダホ、そしてラスベガスにね、かなり移動してますね。で、これがアメリカ国内の、お給料の高い方ですね。マサチューセッツ、ニューヨーク、カリフォルニアの順になってます。で、これが、お給料の低い順ですね。ミシシッピ、アーカンソー、ウェストバージニアっていう順になってます。この収入額は税金の前の金額になりますね。なのでアメリカは州によって所得税があるところとないところがあるので、それによってもキープできる金額が変わってきますね。あとネバダ州は州の所得税はないです。なのでカリフォルニア州よりは収入は減りますが、ネバダ州の所得税がないので、その分住みやすいです。
Americans spend on average $690.75 on food every month, according to the latest data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That amount is significantly higher than any of USDA's estimated grocery bills, including more generous and liberal food plans. Add the out-of-pocket health expenditures that cost the average Americans $96.42 every month, and you get a total expense of $2,816.17 for renters, and $2,744.17 for homeowners. That amount already accounts for 85% of the median take-home pay for average American renters, and over 82% for an average homeowner. This is excluding other essential expenses like transportation, childcare, and debt payments.
Many Americans are really struggling with just the increase of costs of living and food and housing. Utility bills have gone up. Car insurance has gone up. Homeowners insurance has gone up. And how can they pay for them but also meet other goals that they have to?
皆さんこれね、食費代ちょっと付け足したいんですが、これ690ドルが平均となってますが、これね、円に直すと9万円超えちゃってかなりね、高い気がするんですが、690ドルで家族の人数でも異なると思いますが、そんなにね、高いとは思わないです。節約をしている人たちによると、1月1人100ドルの目安だそうです。私もそれを挑戦したんですが、少し無理なので、金額を上げてます。そしてこれに車のローンとか、あと医療費とかが重なるともう大変だと思います。アメリカ医療費が高いので、医療費で自己破産する方も多いです。
Budgeting experts advise Americans to spend just 50% of their net income on essentials, 30% on wants, and 20% on savings or paying off debt.
We see that allocation shifting significantly where people are spending 75% of their take home just on needs, which leaves very little for wants and very little for saving for your financial future. So depending upon where you live and of course your income, many Americans really cannot meet that target allocation.
The Federal Reserve has implemented 11 interest rate hikes to combat inflation since March 2022. But more than a third of Americans said rising interest rates kept them from financial comfort.
Higher interest rates really can stand in the way of affordability for many financial activities or decisions that people want to engage in, and home purchases is sort of at the top of that list.
Look at the person who was going to buy a house that was, let's say, $375,000 2 years ago. Their monthly payment would have been less than $2,000. Now it's about $3,400. And it's the same house, right? The only thing that has changed is the interest rate.
Purchasing a car is more expensive. It's more expensive to maintain a balance on a credit card with the new offers for a credit card, even for the best qualified individual being at 20.5%, and other people are paying closer to 30.
The cost of capital is going up very rapidly, and many of the kind of toeholds we saw for lower income households was because they were having access to credit and to home loans and to other things in a relatively flat economy where they still had a good job market. The ability to access credit both for small businesses and for households, is getting much harder as the financial system becomes more risk averse in that space.
Credit is essential because Americans don't have the savings to cover big expenses. More than 40% of Americans blamed insufficient retirement funds or emergency savings as a reason for financial insecurity.
For a lot of people, just to feel subjectively feel financially better, they need some amount of savings. A lot of financial planners will say 3 months of your income. That's, for many people, just so overwhelming that they can't even begin to think about it.
More than half of Americans today said they didn't have at least 3 months of emergency expenses saved, including 22% that said they had no emergency savings at all.
It doesn't take unemployment to really knock somebody out of whack with respect to their personal finances if they're among the many Americans who say they cannot afford a $1,000 emergency expense and to pay that from their savings.
The reality is, if expenses are routinely higher than your income, you are not going to be able to put away meaningful sums. There are many, many households who do the verb of saving. You see money go into their account all the time. It just doesn't stay there because they are routinely hit with a need to grab that little bit of money and use it for some kind of income shock or unexpected expense or even expected expense.
36% of Americans said they had more credit card debt than emergency savings. According to Experian, an average American holds a debt balance of $96,371, which includes several loan products like credit cards, auto loans, and mortgages. More than a quarter of Americans said debt was what kept them from financial security.
Debt is a way of channeling some of our financial resources, and that can be a very effective tool. Many of us are fans of credit cards that have rewards, for example, but if you're not paying that principal or debt off within the billing cycle, that's when those double-digit percentage interest rates hit, and that can then exact a toll on the other aspects of your personal finances.
How do we properly address this so that people cannot be in the cycle of just focusing on paying debt and necessities, but can even think about transitioning to that other 20% and creating an emergency savings, which causes financial stability, or even saving for retirement, which is the goal of creating future financial stability in retirement?
The fact that many Americans are living in financial insecurity poses a big risk to the economy as a whole.
There's a reason why we measure and monitor very closely things like consumer confidence or consumer sentiment, because what populates those data points are everyday measurements like inflation and the strength of the job market.
So, for example, Social Security is the bedrock of most people's financial security in retirement. It's not the only source of their retirement income, but it keeps a lot of older people out of poverty. And we know that Social Security needs some reforms in order to maintain its same level of benefits.
はい、これがアメリカの現状です。私の個人的な意見としては、インフレで確かに食費は高くなってます。ただそれはなんとかなるわけじゃないですか。ただ電気代、ガソリン代、光熱費、健康保険、家の保険、車の保険、これらもね、ものすごく高くなってるんですよ。そしてアメリカ国内他の部分でもね、いろんな問題があるので、市民のね、不満が強まってると思います。では皆さん、今回は以上です。ではまた次回のビデオでお会いしましょう。バイ。